Rain splattered across the dusty runway at Fort Sumter Air Base as Major Ayanna Brooks stepped out of her locker room, her boots echoing sharply on the concrete floor. Her uniform, a crisp flight suit bearing the insignia of the Air Force and the small stitched name Brooks, shimmered slightly under the harsh fluorescent lights. At 32, Ayanna was already a decorated pilot, one of the very few black women in the elite combat squadron. Her eyes carried both warmth and steel, a mix forged over years of being told she didn't belong. Today wasn't supposed to be different, but as she walked into the hangar, she noticed the hush, a tightening of shoulders, quick sidelong glances, whispers curling around like cigarette smoke. Ayanna had long grown used to this quiet prejudice, the snide remarks hidden under polite smiles, the questions about her real capabilities. But today, something felt more pointed. Sergeant Mitchell, a heavy-set man with a deep southern drawl, stood at the entrance. His arms were crossed, and his jaw clenched tight as a vice. When Ayanna approached, he stepped forward, blocking her path. "Major Brooks," he spat out the rank like it tasted bitter, "there's been a change in plans. We won't be needing you on today's mission." Ayanna's brows knitted. "Excuse me? This is a scheduled operation. I'm slated as lead." Mitchell didn't flinch. "Command decided we should present a more unified image, less distracting." His eyes flickered over her skin, her name patch, her unwavering stare. "You can take off that uniform. You won't be flying today." A hush settled in the hangar. Ayanna felt her heart hammer against her ribs, but she kept her expression calm. This wasn't the first time someone tried to put her in a corner, to strip her of her dignity. But something in her eyes, something unyielding and quietly furious, made Mitchell step back slightly. Ayanna turned without another word, her boots echoing like thunder in the stunned silence. As she walked away, her mind replayed every sacrifice, the years of flight training, the nights studying mission manuals alone in the base library, the times she flew sorties others refused, the medals she received that some insisted she didn't deserve. She walked past the rows of parked aircraft, each shimmering in the rain like sleeping dragons, past the rec room where her crewmates sat in stunned silence, eyes glued to her every step, past the posters touting diversity and honor, words that now felt like empty slogans echoing in an abandoned stadium. She made it to her quarters, shut the door behind her, and finally let her hands tremble. But the fear didn't last long. Underneath it, a molten core of resolve glowed bright. There was a pause. "What are you going to do?" Dawson finally asked. Ayanna looked out the rain-drenched window at the hangars, her breath steadying. "I'm going to remind them why they put these wings on me in the first place." By nightfall, the storm had calmed, leaving puddles glistening like shattered glass under the base lights. Ayanna stood before her mirror, her reflection staring back with defiant eyes. She pulled out her old flight bag from under her bed, a weathered leather case covered with patches and scribbled signatures from pilots she'd trained with across the world. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, creased at the corners, her acceptance letter to the international exchange program with the French Air Force. Years ago, she had been one of the few American pilots invited to train on the Rafale, France's most advanced fighter jet, a plane she had flown in countless drills, missions, and air shows. Ayanna closed her eyes and heard its roar again, felt the throttle hum beneath her fingers, the sky peeling away beneath her wings. She hadn't touched a Rafale in years, but every pilot knew, once you've danced in the sky, the rhythm stays in your blood. She picked up her phone again and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. "Colonel Lafontaine," she said when he answered in a gravelly French accent. It's Ayanna Brooks. Ayanna, mon Dieu, it's been too long. To what do I owe this honor? I need a favor, she said, her voice steady. I need a Rafale, just for tonight. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, then a low chuckle. You Americans and your surprises, you know it's possible. For you, at least. But you must tell me why. She paused, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Because they think I don't deserve this uniform. Because they need to remember who I am. LaFontaine laughed again, softer this time. I will arrange it. Be at the hangar at dawn. That night, Ayanna barely slept. She packed her helmet, gloves, and the old patch from her exchange program, tucking it into her suit pocket. When the sun finally crawled over the horizon, she was already on the tarmac of the nearby civilian airfield where LaFontaine had quietly pulled some strings. The Rafale sat waiting, its sleek frame shimmering like a blade. As she approached, a young French mechanic saluted her sharply. Major Brooks, he said in accented English. She is ready for you. Ayanna ran her hand along the smooth fuselage, breathing in the scent of metal and jet fuel like a long-lost perfume. Sliding into the cockpit felt like coming home. She strapped in, flipped switches, and the engine roared to life beneath her. The moment the Rafale lifted off the runway, Ayanna felt her spirit rise with it. She shot into the sky, slicing through clouds with graceful violence, each maneuver a silent scream of defiance. The morning sun painted the horizon gold as she angled toward the military base. Below, the camp was beginning its drills. Soldiers marched in formation, officers barked orders, and pilots checked their aircraft. Mitchell stood by the hangar, coffee in hand, laughing with a few other officers. Then they heard it. A thunderous roar split the sky as the Rafale came screaming above, dipping low in a breathtaking flyby that rattled every window and set off alarms. Heads jerked up in shock, hats flew from heads, and soldiers dove for cover. Mitchell spilled his coffee, his jaw dropping as he stared up at the ghost, slicing through the air. In one smooth loop, Ayanna pulled the Rafale into a vertical climb, flipped, and dived back down with a flourish that would have made any airshow crowd lose their minds. On her final pass, she flew so low that they could see the name on her helmet, Brooks. As she banked away and shot into the clouds, a stunned silence swept across the base. Mitchell stood frozen, his hands trembling. Someone whispered, "Was that Major Brooks?" Inside the cockpit, Ayanna's heart thundered with exhilaration and rage turned into pure freedom. When Ayanna finally landed, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The young French mechanics rushed forward, their faces lit with awe and respect. One of them handed her a bottle of water, his hand still shaking. "You were magnificent, Major," he whispered in French. Ayanna smiled, exhausted but alive. "Merci," she said softly, bowing her head. She sat on the wing for a moment, staring at the quiet airfield. Every muscle in her body hummed with energy, but inside, something else had shifted. A deep sadness, the weight of years spent fighting to be seen and heard. Meanwhile, back at the American base, the officers scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Videos of her daring flyby flooded social media within minutes. Young soldiers posted clips captioned, "Major Brooks just schooled us all." Others simply wrote, "Legend." Mitchell paced his office like a caged animal. He replayed the footage over and over, his face turning pale. It wasn't just the flying, it was the message. The truth slammed into him harder than any reprimand ever could. He had underestimated a woman whose courage and skill far outshone his own. The next morning, Ayanna returned to the base, this time in her uniform. Every pair of eyes followed her as she walked past the barracks, past the hangars, past the rows of young soldiers standing at attention. Some saluted her with trembling hands, others dropped their gaze in shame. Mitchell waited by the headquarters building, his face pale. When she stopped in front of him, he opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand. "Don't," she said, her voice low and steady. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to apologize." He swallowed hard, his eyes burning with humiliation. "You wanted me to take off this uniform because you thought I didn't deserve it," she continued, her words slicing the air like a blade. "But this uniform isn't just cloth and rank. It's sacrifice, it's loyalty. It's every sunrise I watched from a cockpit while you slept. It's every friend I lost in missions you'll never understand." Mitchell's lips quivered. "You wanted me small, invisible," Ayanna said. "But I was born to fly, and you can't clip wings that were made for the heavens." A hush fell over the courtyard. Then, one by one, soldiers began to clap, slowly at first, hesitant. But soon the sound grew, echoing against the concrete, rolling across the base like thunder. Ayanna turned and walked away without looking back. Her steps were light, her heart unburdened. In that moment, she didn't just reclaim her place, she transformed it. Later that week, higher command arrived at the base to investigate the incident. Mitchell was demoted and reassigned to a far-off logistics post, a quiet punishment that stung more than any official reprimand. Ayanna, meanwhile, was called into a special meeting with top generals. They offered her a promotion and a new assignment: to lead an elite team of young pilots, a chance to shape the next generation, to make sure no one else would be told they didn't belong. That night, as she stood on the balcony of her small base apartment, she looked up at the stars, thinking of all the nights she had dreamed of them as a child. She took a deep breath. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a symbol of strength, of justice, of what it meant to fight not just in the skies, but in the hearts of people. As weeks passed, Ayanna stepped into her new role with a quiet power. She entered the training hangar early each morning, her steps echoing on the cold floor, her presence alone commanding respect. Young pilots lined up, hearts pounding, their eyes wide with anticipation and fear. But Ayanna didn't bark orders or throw her authority around. She listened, she watched. She saw the tremble in a young cadet's hand, the nervous foot-tapping of another. Instead of breaking them down, she built them up. One morning, she gathered them in a circle. "Tell me," she said, scanning each face, "why did you choose to fly?" A young woman named Priya raised her hand first. "Because I wanted to feel free," she said, her voice shaking but her eyes fierce. A young man named Carlos spoke next. "Because I grew up watching jets scream across the sky and thought, that's where I want to be, above everything holding me down." Ayanna nodded, taking in each story as if it were a sacred text. "That's the fire," she said softly. "Don't let anyone put it out. Not an instructor, not a commander, not even your own doubts. The skies don't care about our skin or our gender or where we came from. The skies only want our courage." Her words burned into them deeper than any lecture could. Days turned into weeks, and Ayanna transformed that group of recruits. She taught them dogfight maneuvers, emergency landings, but more than that, she taught them to trust themselves. Meanwhile, word of her leadership and the Rafale incident spread beyond the base. News outlets ran headlines like, "Black female pilot breaks barriers in the sky," and "Major Ayanna Brooks, the face of the new Air Force." But Ayanna ignored the noise. Fame wasn't her goal. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of flight drills, a young cadet named Eric approached her. His voice was quiet, almost afraid. "Ma'am, I heard what happened with Commander Mitchell. The way you stood up, it gave me hope. My father never believed I could do this. He said I should stay on the farm, keep my head down." Ayanna placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You are not here to live someone else's small vision," she said. "You're here to soar. Your father's fear is not your destiny." Tears welled up in Eric's eyes, but for the first time he stood a little taller. At night, Ayanna often lay in bed replaying the day's events. She remembered the days she had hidden her medals, the nights she'd sat alone wondering if the fight was worth it. But seeing these young pilots grow, seeing them believe in themselves, it felt like finally breathing after years underwater. A surprise came weeks later, when the Secretary of Defense requested to meet her. Ayanna assumed it was a formality, maybe a new assignment. But when she arrived at the Pentagon, she was greeted with a standing ovation from senior officers and government officials. As she walked to the front, the secretary stepped forward with a small box. "For your courage in the skies and on the ground," he said, opening the box to reveal a distinguished Flying Cross medal. Ayanna's hands trembled as she accepted it. She looked out at the rows of officials and reporters, and for a moment, her mind flashed to the girl standing alone in her bedroom, dreaming of stars, fighting tears after being told she'd never belong. She closed her eyes, took a breath and opened them again, stronger, steadier. After the ceremony, she spoke to the press. "This is not just for me," she said. "This is for every young girl told she is too loud, too ambitious, too different. For every young boy taught that his dreams should be smaller than his fears. We don't fly to escape gravity, we fly to challenge it." The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy and electric. That night, back at her quarters, Ayanna stood by her window. Outside, the moon hung low, casting silver light on the runway. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, we fly again." After the Pentagon ceremony, Ayanna became more than a symbol. She became a movement. Across the country, young women and men of color began sending letters, videos, and emails, thanking her for showing them a different future. Schools invited her to speak. Military academies quoted her words on posters, and social media erupted with support. Yet, through it all, Ayanna stayed grounded. Back at the base, she insisted on sticking to her training schedule. One morning, she showed up before dawn to find the young pilots waiting in the hangar, whispering excitedly. As she stepped in, they turned toward her with shining eyes. "Major Brooks," Priya said, stepping forward nervously, "we wanted to show our gratitude. We know you hate ceremonies, but—" Priya turned, revealing a large canvas draped behind her. As they pulled the cloth away, Ayanna gasped. It was a massive painting of her Rafale jet, soaring above a golden sunrise, a black silhouette of Ayanna in the cockpit, with words painted beneath. "We don't fly to escape gravity. We fly to challenge it." Ayanna's throat tightened, and she felt tears threatening to spill. She hadn't cried in front of her cadets before, but this moment broke something open inside her. A lifetime of silent battles and quiet victories flooding out all at once. Without a word, she stepped forward and hugged each cadet, one by one. In those embraces, she felt the walls she'd carried her whole life crumble, replaced by something stronger than armor: community. As months passed, Ayanna's leadership transformed the culture of the base. Racist remarks disappeared. The toxic jokes stopped. Instead, camaraderie and respect filled the halls. Commander Mitchell, the man who once ordered her to remove her uniform, watched from a distance. Unable to deny her influence or her results, he requested a transfer. His authority shattered by the very woman he'd tried to humiliate. On a bright spring morning, Ayanna was invited to attend an air show over the capital city. Tens of thousands gathered, cheering as planes roared above in tight formations. Ayanna stood by her Rafale, shaking hands and inspiring young people who crowded around her. Then, at the end of the show, the event organizers handed her the microphone. "This stage is yours," one of them whispered. Ayanna stepped forward, looking out at the sea of faces, children on their fathers' shoulders, young women clutching flight brochures, veterans saluting with tears in their eyes. "I stand here because I refuse to be small," she began, her voice strong and resonant. "I was told to take off my uniform. I was told to stay on the ground. But every time someone tried to clip my wings, I grew stronger. To every person here who has been pushed aside, laughed at, or silenced, know this: the skies belong to you too. We don't earn respect by shrinking, we earn it by soaring." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some clapped wildly, some cried openly, others simply stood frozen in awe. That night, Ayanna returned to her quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. As she took off her uniform and folded it neatly, she thought back to the first time she'd worn it. The excitement, the terror, the sense that she might always be a stranger in her own dream. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, a woman no longer battling to prove herself, but standing firmly in her power. She opened her window to let in the night breeze and whispered to the stars above, "I flew today not just for me, but for every silent dreamer out there." Outside, the moon glowed bright and gentle, as if nodding in quiet approval. As Ayanna lay in bed that night, she replayed the day's events in her mind like a quiet film. The bright smiles, the applause echoing off the hangar walls, the tears on the faces of young women who saw themselves reflected in her. But more than anything, she felt a deep, steady warmth, a quiet certainty that she had finally become who she was meant to be. In the following weeks, Ayanna was invited to speak at universities and international aviation conferences. Everywhere she went, audiences leaned forward, hanging on every word. She didn't speak only of jets and flight patterns. She spoke of courage, of dignity, of fighting silent wars inside ourselves. At one conference, a young woman in a wheelchair raised her hand shakily. "Major Brooks," she said softly, "did you ever feel like giving up? Like maybe it wasn't worth it?" Ayanna paused. The room went completely still. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Many times. When they closed doors on me, when I sat alone in my dorm room with rejection letters, when I heard whispers in the locker room, I felt so small I wanted to disappear. But each time I nearly gave up, I thought about one thing. Who else would suffer if I didn't keep going? Who might lose hope if I stepped back into the shadows?" Tears filled the girl's eyes. Ayanna continued, her voice steady and soft as a gentle tide. "We don't fight just for ourselves. We fight for every person who's watching, quietly hoping we make it. That's how we light the way." After her speech, the young woman came up in her chair and took Ayanna's hand. "You gave me my wings today," she whispered. Ayanna bent down, forehead to forehead, and whispered back, "Then promise me you'll fly." As news of Ayanna's story spread globally, an invitation arrived from a prestigious international air show in Paris. There, she was asked to lead the final aerial display, a moment that would be broadcast live to millions. On the day of the show, Ayanna stood beside her Rafale on the runway in Paris, the same city where she had once trained and felt invisible. She ran her hand along the smooth metal, remembering the young cadet who had nearly quit, the young woman who had faced locker room insults, and the daughter who had watched her mother sew flight patches late into the night. When she climbed into the cockpit, a hush fell across the airfield. As her jet roared into the sky, the crowd erupted. A single, unified gasp of awe and pride. In the air, she looped and soared, spelling "Rise" in white vapor against the brilliant blue sky. People watching below screamed and wept. The final turn brought her directly over the center of the city, where old rooftops and modern glass towers met. From that vantage point, Ayanna saw it all. A living tapestry of millions of people, each with a story, each with a struggle. As she banked for the final pass, Ayanna closed her eyes for a second, feeling the wind press against her helmet, the hum of the engine below her bones, the pulse of her own unstoppable spirit. She returned to the runway, climbing down to find the entire audience on their feet. Not a single person sat. Not a single face was untouched by her flight. A girl in a bright yellow dress pushed forward through the crowd and handed Ayanna a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I want to be a pilot too," she whispered shyly. Ayanna knelt, took the girl's hand and smiled. "You already have everything you need. Now go build your wings." As the day ended, cameras caught Ayanna looking up at the sky once more, her expression a mix of gratitude, triumph, and something deeper, the quiet joy of knowing she had turned her pain into a runway for others to launch from. Months later, Ayanna was invited to deliver a keynote speech at the International Women in Aviation Conference. The vast auditorium shimmered with eager faces, pilots, engineers, ground crew, and students, all looking up at her with the kind of reverence once reserved for untouchable heroes. As she stepped onto the stage in her sharp flight uniform, Ayanna paused to take in the moment. She remembered the first time she wore this uniform and how they had asked her to take it off. Now she wore it with pride before thousands. The very symbol they tried to strip from her had become her banner of strength. She started her speech with a calm, steady voice. "I was once told that I didn't belong, that my dreams were too big, too loud, too impossible. But I learned something powerful. Your worth is not determined by the voices that try to diminish you. It's defined by the sky you claim for yourself." The room fell into a hush so deep you could almost hear hearts beating. Ayanna shared stories of her struggles and the silent battles she fought alone in locker rooms and briefing halls. She spoke of her first solo flight, the day she flew the Rafale over the camp, and how she turned pain into purpose. She looked into the crowd and saw young black girls, women in headscarves, older women who had never dared to dream of flying, all with tears in their eyes, nodding, as if they finally saw themselves reflected on that stage. "And to every little girl who thinks she doesn't belong," Ayanna said, her voice cracking with emotion, "I am here to tell you, you do. You belong wherever your spirit dares to fly." The standing ovation seemed to last forever. After her speech, people rushed forward, some just wanting to touch her hand, others wanting to share their own dreams and burdens. In those moments, Ayanna realized that true flight wasn't just about engines and altitude, it was about lifting others higher. Days later, she received letters from girls across the world. One from a girl in Kenya who had started building model planes out of scrap metal. One from a young woman in Brazil who had enrolled in flight school the very next day after seeing Ayanna speak. Each story was a spark, and together they became a fire no one could extinguish. Ayanna spent her remaining years flying missions that mattered most to her heart. Search and rescue, medical supply drops, mentoring young pilots on humanitarian airlifts. She refused high-paying contracts and instead focused on using her aircraft as a vessel of hope. As she grew older, she would often visit the hangar at sunrise, placing her hand on the cold metal of her beloved Rafale, whispering, "Thank you for carrying me to my dreams." In those quiet hours, she felt closest to her younger self, the girl who once stood trembling in front of locker room mirrors. When Ayanna passed away peacefully years later, the world mourned. Thousands gathered at her memorial flight show. As dozens of jets drew her name across the sky, people looked up and felt the weight of her legacy in their chests, not just as a pilot, but as a beacon of courage and dignity. A new generation of girls and boys vowed that day to chase the impossible, to stand taller, and to live lives that honored their dreams. Ayanna's story lived on, in textbooks, in documentaries, in the hearts of countless souls who now believed that the sky had no limits. Every day at exactly 6 a.m., the bell above Mel's diner chimed softly as a thin old man shuffled in, wearing a faded tweed jacket and carrying a worn leather notebook. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee and a single pancake, and sat alone at the corner booth near the window. No phone, no fuss, just scribbling equations and diagrams in that tattered book. One Saturday morning, a group of high schoolers walked in, loud and laughing. One pointed at the old man and snickered, "Look at Grandpa Einstein back there, trying to solve world hunger." Another chimed in, "Bet he's drawing rocket ships for aliens." They laughed louder when he looked up and gave a quiet nod, saying nothing. Rachel, the young waitress who'd just started working weekends, frowned. She didn't like how they treated him, but she said nothing, just refilled his coffee and gave a warm smile like always. But that night, curiosity got the better of her. After the diner closed, she asked Mel, the owner, "Do you know who he is?" Mel leaned on the counter and whispered, "That's Harold Greer, retired engineer. He used to work for NASA, helped design the Mars rover, if you can believe it. But he lost his wife a few years ago, then just kind of faded into the background." Rachel's eyes widened. The next morning, she sat beside Mr. Greer after her shift. "Sir, is it true? About Mars?" He looked surprised, then smiled gently. "That rover was my baby. 14 years on that team. I guess I miss it sometimes more than anything." Rachel shared the story online, a small post about a brilliant man the world had forgotten. It went viral overnight. By Monday, reporters were calling. NASA even reached out. The teens who'd mocked him saw the post and came back to the diner, this time to apologize. Mr. Greer simply smiled. "It's all right. Sometimes people just don't know what's behind the silence." 2 weeks later, the town held a ceremony at the community center. They gave him a plaque, a standing ovation, and a model of the Mars rover with his name engraved on it. But the most touching moment came when one of the teens, teary-eyed, said, "You made me want to be an engineer." Harold passed away peacefully a few months later. At his funeral, Rachel spoke through tears. He was a reminder that brilliance can be quiet, that heroes don't always wear badges or demand respect. Sometimes they just sit in diners, writing in silence, waiting for someone to see them. Moral: never underestimate someone's story. True greatness often sits in the shadows, waiting to be noticed.